Julian used to say he loved the way I softened rooms. He said it casually, like an observation, not a compliment he expected gratitude for. Whenever we walked into a space together, he'd lean close and whisper it in my ear. "You calm people," he'd say. "Everything feels easier when you're around." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. At the time, my life was loud. I spoke before rehearsing. I laughed without checking the room. My opinions arrived fully formed, unapologetic, and sometimes inconvenient. I had ambitions that spilled into conversations and dreams that refused to stay private. Julian said that was what drew him to me. "You're alive," he told me once, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back. "You don't shrink." I didn't notice then how carefully he said it, as if shrinking were a choice I simply hadn't made yet. Love, when it arrives gently, doesn't announce what it plans to change. It doesn't say, "I will rearrange you." It doesn't say, "I will refine you until you are easier to keep." It arrives like safety, like relief, like someone offering to hold the weight you've been carrying, just for a while. After we married, things shifted slowly, almost politely. Julian started finishing my sentences. At first it felt intimate, like we were learning each other's rhythms. Then he started finishing my thoughts. Then my decisions. "You trust me, don't you?" he'd ask, always gently, always with that calm smile that made disagreement feel unnecessary. And I did trust him. So when invitations stopped arriving with my name on them, I assumed it was an oversight. When opportunities passed without discussion, I assumed timing. When people started calling me supportive instead of driven, I told myself it was growth. When my world grew smaller, I called it maturity. That's the thing about control when it's wrapped in romance. It feels like care. Julian handled the logistics, the calendars, the replies. He framed it as teamwork. "I'll take this off your plate," he'd say. "You've been doing so much." And I was tired, so I let him. I didn't notice when my voice softened to match his preferences, when my laughter lowered its volume, when my dreams learned to wait for permission. I noticed later, much later, the night everything shifted. I came home earlier than expected. The house smelled warm, familiar. Something simmering on the stove. Something safe. The kind of evening you don't question. I dropped my bag by the door and kicked off my shoes quietly, already planning to surprise him. That's when I heard voices. They drifted from the study, low and unhurried, like a conversation that assumed privacy. I wasn't trying to listen. I just stopped. "She's settled now," Julian said. His voice was calm, certain, the same tone he used when discussing investments or long-term plans. "There's no reason to disrupt that," someone replied, a voice I recognized, though softer than usual. "She still doesn't know?" There was a pause, not hesitation, consideration. "She doesn't need to." My keys pressed into my palm so hard it hurt. I stood there, frozen in the hallway, listening to my life being discussed as if I weren't standing a few steps away. As if I were an object. Something chosen, arranged, maintained. They spoke about me like furniture. Valuable, useful, stationary. In that moment, the house didn't feel warm anymore. It felt staged. I walked into the kitchen a minute later, careful to sound normal. Julian looked up and smiled, the same smile he'd practiced for years. "You're home early," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Thought I'd surprise you." He kissed my cheek, his hand lingering just long enough to feel affectionate. His eyes searched my face, briefly, measuring. I smiled back. That was the first lie I told him. That night, lying beside him, listening to his breathing slow, I stared into the dark and replayed every moment I'd dismissed. Every decision I'd labeled reasonable. Every silence I'd mistaken for peace. I realized something chilling. Julian didn't fall in love with who I was. He fell in love with who he knew he could make me become. And I helped him, because I wanted harmony more than truth. Because I confused being chosen with being known. As his arm rested heavy across my waist, possessive even in sleep, another thought surfaced, quieter, but sharper. The cage wasn't the marriage. It was the version of myself I had agreed to stay inside. And once you see the bars, you can't pretend they aren't there. By morning, Julian would still believe everything was exactly as he left it. He would kiss my forehead, ask about my plans, speak to me like someone certain of ownership. He wouldn't know that somewhere in the dark, while his arm rested heavy across my waist, something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't dramatic. I was alert. And once a woman becomes alert to the way her life is being managed, there is no version of love that can put her back to sleep.